Hey YouTube, Poopslag here, and this is TurboFat, an open source game I'm making in Godot. Source code's linked below if you want to check out how it works. But last month I drew all the assets for this new area, Lemony Thickets, which is like the second area in the game I've ever made. But this month I wanted to tie that new area, all those assets and stuff, into the story and puzzle parts of the game. The problem being, the puzzle stuff where like you have your blocks that you're dropping and the little scene over here where you're feeding the customers, that was the first stuff I wrote like 2 years ago, and I was still just sort of learning Godot. And now all that stuff needed to be modular to let you swap in this new environment sometimes, but it was really not written that way, so I had to dust it off and fix it and make the code a little cleaner. Let me tell you how I fixed all that stuff. So the first obstacle I had was reconciling what I'm going to call the flat environments with the spatial environments, by which I mean the very first puzzle scene I wrote 2 years ago when you were like feeding food to customers and stuff was just like, it was a very simple environment where there was like a customer object here, and then customer B was 1,000 pixels to their right, and they were just little flat sprites, and I needed to have something behind them, so I put like a big rectangle, and then they needed to be sitting on something, so I just put like, oh, here you have like a little stool sprite, like sort of positioned here where it looks right. But later I eventually wrote an environment where you could run around in and where cutscenes took place, where it's like this object is here, but then you run around the counter and you can talk to this customer who's over here and his shadows cast here. So it was more of like a spatial thing, and I just wanted to be able to take those spatial environments and then just put them into the puzzle mode. But that took a little bit of doing because there were a lot of assumptions in the puzzle code of saying like, oh, when customer B shows up, pan exactly 1,000 pixels to the right and everything's horizontal, and it's like, well, now I have to break those assumptions and rewrite all that stuff to be a little bit more complex. But I got it done, and the new code is pretty cool. And obviously I got to delete a lot of stuff because the new camera code was already like more or less there. So I just got to repurpose a lot of the new stuff. But wedging it into the puzzle was like a week and a half worth of work. So, but it's done now, and everything's nice and simple. So reusing these spatial scenes in the puzzle scene, though, did totally ruin the shadow overlapping code. So if you look at the old shadows, they look all right, but then the new ones have this ugly Venn diagram look whenever two shadows overlap. And the reason is the old code had this hack where it would have this on-screen buffer which followed the player around and rendered the shadows just around like the part of the screen where they could see. And that buffer, it was like inside the game world. It needed to follow where they were because the shadow objects are like behind some objects but in front of the ground, right? So when I started reusing this code in the puzzle scene and I had like two cameras into the same scene, now it's like, well, where does this buffer go? Do I have like one huge buffer which renders shadows for this giant area and consumes a ton of video memory? Or do we have two tiny buffers which render just that area, but then like, wait, what if they overlap? What if there's these two shadow buffers, both rendering shadows for the area around the player and the area around the customer, and then they sort of cross? You're gonna have these like dark areas that are like rectangles where those two buffers collided. So it's such an ugly problem to fix, and it is fixable. I will be honest. There's probably some clumsy, ugly hack which will work, but Godot 4.0 adds what's called canvas groups. So if I just hold my breath and procrastinate for another 6 months, whenever they release Godot 4.0, or if I just decide to move to Godot 4.0 when it's still sort of in alpha or beta, canvas groups just fix all this. So I'm just going to put it off. Shadows are a little uglier for now, and it kind of sucks. So finally, though, with all those little tweaks, I was able to have a separate environment for Lemony Thickets for the puzzles, where you can feed them and they're outside, and there's no tables or restaurant area. It's just, yeah, for story reasons, you're just in the forest. So I fleshed out Lemony Thickets with a few new buildings. So you got your house over here, and a little restaurant, and Fat Sensei's house way down here. And I was having some trouble getting them like positioned where, like in career mode, they wouldn't block players. They'd still be visible and you could see the top. So I added a few cheat codes to make testing that stuff easier, where you can just move the camera freely or move the player back and forth on the path. So I tweaked this wood background that had been in my game forever. I made it fill in the sides now, and I didn't like how it looked stretching, so I actually made it tile. I redrew it to be tileable, and it's pretty cool. But weirdly in Godot, you can use this like texture rect object to tile stuff, but you can't then say like I want the texture to be smaller. It's too big, because I like making my assets like 2,000 pixels wide. That way, if people ever use a bigger resolution, it'll look good. But you can't then tell Godot like, whoa, shrink that texture. That's too big. There's no like shrink a texture idea. You just have to render the texture at full size always. So I wrote my own little hack to work around that. It's just a weird one-liner, but there it is. I also redid this puzzle backdrop for Lemony Thickets. So now based on where you are, like if you're here, then instead of having this wood cutting board for the backdrop, you'll just have nature, and each area could have its own little backdrop. I also added a new tutorial, Meet Spins, which is all about doing spin moves and like turning pieces in tight corridors to make boxes and stuff. And I wanted to show off like the cool spin moves you can do in this game because they are not standard. They are their own weird thing, which are good for boxes and specifically boxes. So there's a tutorial which takes you through some of the harder ones, and there is an Easter egg if you flip pieces too often when the instructor doesn't really want you to do that in the earlier scenarios, but if you flip him anyway, he gets mad and he punishes you. So have fun with that. So that's where we're at after April. We got this new area, Lemony Thickets, tied pretty well into the puzzles, where it's got this like puzzle backdrop just for Lemony Thickets, and you feel like you're in a new area and you're serving people and they're outdoors, they're not inside the restaurant. So maybe it starts to feel like a little bit of a sense of progression. You're going from one area to the next as you play through the game. That's what I wanted. The other half, though, that I didn't quite do, I did write all the cutscenes and like the buildings. So you're like talking outside this place, and then like, oh, I'm at your house. I wrote all those cutscenes and got them in the game, but then when I went to tie them in with the levels, so that like when you play through the levels, it would pick the right cutscene, I realized this logic isn't going to quite work the way I want it to. So I need to go back to that just a little bit. Hopefully, it won't take too long. The other thing I do want to do next month is just retool the levels for the first two areas, just to have some pretty basic, intro-y, simple stuff that's just more rewarding. And when you're weaning people into the game, it's not like, oh man, this is hard. You know, I want it to be a little gentle. And also the main title screen, like when you first get through the first tutorial and you haven't played the game before, there's a lot of buttons there. Some are confusing. Some will honestly like crash the game if you go into like the level editor and you're, what's this? And you start typing stuff and it's like, that's not JSON. So it'll get mad. So I wanna hide a lot of that stuff and just say like, if you know what you're doing, type this and you can get to the editors. But if you're just playing the game, let's just have a big play button, you know, just something very gentle and very intuitive. So anyways, though, if you're enjoying the game, if you like what you see, we do have a Discord if you want to come voice your opinions and say what you think or what you want me to fix. I welcome criticism. I can't promise I'll feel good about myself, but I will try not to take it out on you. And that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys next month, hopefully with some cool new content. See you later.